Welcome to this edition of Returning to the Garden. The reason we are covering this material is we've discovered something extraordinary, something no human has considered in thousands of years. It's not only that the story of what happened in the Garden of Eden is prophetic and that it is instructive, but also that God, whose name is Yahowah, is inviting us back into the garden, and our readmittance is going to occur in less than 8 years from now. In our study of the garden, we learned a number of things that, as I have said, were previously unheralded. Foremost among them is that the fall of man was not created by man. It wasn't a sin that man or woman caused. It was God that in the fall caused the fall of man by his own admission. And we have diagnosed why that was the case. And this is essential because if you want to go back to the garden and avail yourselves of this opportunity, then you need to know what foreclosed on the chance that Adam and Chawah were given and yet failed. And what we have discovered is that Yahweh specifically created Adam as a unique man among many other animals and many other humans, and brought him into the garden with a nesalma, which is a form of conscience, different than consciousness. Consciousness is something all animals have. It's a soul. It enables a person to observe and then respond to their environment. It differentiates plants from animals. But a conscience, which is an nesalma, is the ability to reason, to make sound decisions, to differentiate between right and wrong, good and bad, productive and counterproductive. And in that environment, which was a sheltered enclosure, and even that is extraordinary, because once again, we're the first to recognize that the Gan, this sheltered enclosure of Eden, this protected and covered environment that was conducive to life, is replicated in the name of Sukkah, which is the seventh of the 7 Mow'ed Miqra'ey of Yahowah, which means it is our destination. Sukkah is based upon the verb sakak, which means to shelter, to enclose, and protect. Just as Gan, as in garden, is from Ganan, which means to shelter, to enclose, and to protect. Which means that when we reach year 6,000 Yah, which is in 2033, less than 8 years from now, and begin to observe Sukkah, which is the 7th of October of that year, we will be returning to the garden. God says this adroitly pursuant to taruw'ah, because on taruw'ah, 15 days earlier, God has made it quite clear he's going to incinerate all of those who have come to harm Israel. All of the religious, all of the political, all the conspiratorial, and all anti-Semites will be gone right then, incinerated. And then God's going to restore, terraform the earth so that it returns to the conditions of Eden. And then that was a powerful sign by itself, because what that means is that the earth itself is a broader version of Gan Eden. In other words, Gan Eden, this Garden of Eden, it was a microcosm of Earth. Earth is a sheltered garden, protected, covered, and conducive to life. When you understand all of the fine-tuning of our planet, right up to the molten core and magnetic shield protecting us from all manner of cosmic harm, and our atmosphere, laden as it is with water, also protecting us, then you recognize that this planet is finely tuned for life. It's sheltered, it's protected. And so when Yahweh returns the entire earth to the conditions that we're experiencing in Eden, it will be an extraordinary opportunity. And it will take place on Sukkah, the 7th of October in 2033. Now, that wasn't the end of it. What we realized that God specifically said of Adam that he had been conceived to be observant and engaged. God wanted him to abide, to contribute, to be a collaborator, to work in the garden, to make life better for himself and for the environment that he was in. Adam did not. He asked Adam to be observant. God was looking for an explorer that eventually he could take off of this planet and trust to go off and visit faraway galaxies and explore new worlds. But there's no indication that Adam was the least bit observant. He talked to Adam and expected him to listen and then to respond appropriately, but he did not. And he had hoped that the man could earn his trust so that when we do leave this planet and have this grand opportunity to explore the universe, God knows that if he provides instructions, we'll listen so that we don't do irreparable harm to ourselves and others or to his creation. Adam failed on all accounts. And in a protective enclosure, there was no chance that it was going to improve. And quite frankly, Yahowah was bored. There was no reason to continue the relationship, and he booted Adam and Chawah out of the garden. Now, the reason this is important is if you're going to be among those who's invited back to the garden, you need to know what God will be expecting of you for you to grow past it, for you to go past year 6,000 Yah to 7,000 Yah and hit the 8th octave into infinity so that you can be released from this planet and trusted to go explore. That will require you to be observant, to closely examine and carefully consider everything that has been presented to you, particularly in the testimony of Yahowah, particularly in his Torah. It will require you to be a good listener so that you know what God said and you respond appropriately. It will require you to learn from what God has offered. It will require you to engage. This idea that you can feel your way to salvation or that salvation is by way of faith is utter nonsense. No, you're going to have to know who God is, know how to relate to him, and you're going to need to engage, to be a collaborator. God values work. Adam didn't work, and if you want to be with God going forward, you're going to need to value work. This is not an entitlement society. It is a relationship where all parties contribute. Work is good, beneficial, collaborative, bonding, creates value. But also, God's not looking for perfection. In fact, the instructions he gave to Adam was simply, don't make a habit of doing the one thing I'm asking you not to do. If you did it once and learned from it, then no big deal. That it just moved on. But what God's looking for is that if we make a mistake, when we make a mistake, and we have to make mistakes, because if we don't make mistakes, we don't grow. We don't have an opportunity to prove our resolve. If we don't make mistakes, we must stumble to be worth anything to anybody, to have character, to have confidence. What God wants is that when we do stumble, when we fall, that we have what it takes to get back up. We get going again. We dust ourselves off. We learn from the experience, and we build upon what we have learned. These are the things that God's looking for. Now, all of those are really profound insights as to what happened in the garden. But there were so many more. For example, we discovered that Adam, the man, was conceived in God's image when he was given a nesama, a conscience. The woman was actually created in man's image. The next thing we learned is that the woman was conceived specifically to be helpful to the man. And this means that man was created to have a relationship with God. Woman was created to be helpful to the man, which means that they would collectively be able to have a relationship with God, but that's how the relationship would work. And if you're a little bit out of shape and say, I'm a woman, hear me roar, understand that God views work positively. He tells us routinely that for those who relate to him, who engage with him, he is their helper. Use the exact same word, it's there. And so he is asking women to be as he is, helpful, supportive. It pays dividends, makes the relationship better. We've learned many things. In studying all of this, one of the things we have learned also is that there was no Eve. That's a mother goddess. The woman in the garden was named Chawah. And we're also about to cover the turf of how Hasatan would mislead her. And what's interesting about this is that not one person in a million understands who the serpent is and what Satan's role is. Satan was created by Yahowah. He was programmed by Yahowah. He was doing what he was programmed to do. And he has continued to do as he was programmed as he creates religions. And for the most part, he actually quoted Yahowah accurately. Occasionally he would stumble, but for the most part, he quoted Yahowah accurately. And it was the woman who took off from there and ad-libbed, which not a good idea. So this is also an important insight. And one of the things we've also covered already is that there were two trees in the garden. Everybody knows that. One was the tree of lives, plural, because the whole purpose of the tree of lives is to give you another one beyond this one. And that tree of lives represents David, the Messiah and Son of God, because he's the one as our Savior that in his second of three lives fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Miqra'ey, with Pesach opening the doorway to continued life. The other tree is the endtimes. It is the tree of knowledge. And when we compare what God had to say about the tree of knowledge, the endtimes, to God's instruction through Isaiah in the 11th chapter regarding the Choter, who is a stem that is sheresh, rooted, and a netzir, observant branch. You get the metaphors here? That he, in addition, be given the spirit of Yahowah, the spirit of chokmah, intelligence, the spirit of binah, understanding, that he's given the spirit of etzah, which means that he's a tree, providing counsel on the entirety of the picture that God has painted for us. And that also, in addition to having the spirit of Gabry'el, of confidence and ability, he's being given the spirit of Dayath, which means he's the etzah Dayath, which means the Choter of Isaiah 11, which is the most interesting prophetic figure written about by a long shot. I mean, the Choter is hugely more interesting and influential in terms of prophecy than is the Messiah. There really isn't a messianic prophecy that says there's going to be a Messiah that's going to arrive and that he's going to appear in the last days. No, the only one is the one that the Messiah himself gives, dubbed as Gabry'el, the confident and courageous man of God, in 555 BCE, when he gave the exact dates that he, as the Messiah, would be cut off, but not for himself, to fulfill Chag Matzah. But the big end time prophecy that has the most bang for it is that of the Choter, which is significant because the Choter is the one person in all of human history that's given the seven spirits of Yahowah. And that everything said about the Choter paints him as the tree of knowledge. He's not a messianic figure, as so many have wrongly assumed, but in fact, he is the tree of knowledge. So we also deduced this realization as well. So let's continue and learn what we may from the garden experience so that we're prepared for our return in less than 8 years from now. It says the spellbinding serpent, Waha Nakash. So then the sorceress snake, this venomous viper, this poisonous cold-blooded reptile. And I must tell you that when Hasatan, the adversary, came to meet Chawah at this moment, he was not new to her, and he was not actually a snake. God uses symbols, metaphors, to describe people's nature. For example, the Choter is the tree of knowledge. The Choter is a man. The man is not a tree, but that man provides a tree of knowledge through these kinds of books. That's the message here. So the serpent is actually a Kerub. It's a level of Malak. Malak are Yahweh's heavenly messengers, spiritual messengers. A Malak can be a man, but is most commonly they're part of Yahweh's heavenly ensemble of messengers, of implements that he uses. And the highest level of the Malak is a Kerub. That's why the Kerub are placed in the most set apart place within the temple, and also on the Ark of the Covenant itself. He was one of those. And his role was to guard the Gan Eden. And he wasn't guarding it to keep them in, but to keep trouble out. You see, humans existed all outside of the garden at this point. They had for probably, maybe even up to 200,000 years in terms of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. And so that's what they were there for. So he came off the wall. And we learn a lot actually about his identity and nature by reading Ezekiel. Ezekiel is not a prophetic book, but it is a book that is inspired by Satan and presents Satan's perspective on all things, including his hatred of Jews. That's why it has 25 ways to kill a Jew. His rape of Jewish women. There's 2 rape scenes in it. It's vicious. The presentation of the Lord in Ezekiel is astrological, is Babylonian. And his ultimate agenda through the Coppercon, this measure man who is Donald Trump, is to build this grand edifice that paves over all of Jerusalem in his temple with naming rights. And yes, you heard that correct. The Satan's incarnate during the last days is Donald Trump. And he's presented as the Coppercon in the latter part of Ezekiel. And when we read all of this, we find that, in fact, Satan inspired it such that he tells us his perspective of what happened in the garden, and he is none too pleased. He thinks that he was treated wrongly. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He was beautiful, and he got a raw deal, is how he presents himself in Ezekiel. So that's who the character is. The spellbinding serpent, as we read Nakash, was at the time cunning and clever. It was written in the Call Perfect, which I'm quite pleased with, because that means that the cunning and clever nature of Hasatan at this point was cunning and clever, shrewd, subtle, while appearing sensible, crafty, obscuring, elusive, ambiguous with his counsel, highly skilled at being mischievous, abusive and treacherous as well, elusive in counsel and ambiguous when obscuring the truth. And it says more so are from Mem, any other life form relative to the open way that Yahowah as God had deployed. Asha had conceived and created, had enabled and engaged. The fact that both of those verbs are written in the perfect means that there was a period of time where Satan was that more shrewd than anyone else. That is not the case now. If you look at Christianity, it was clever, but so many logical fallacies in it. So much of it is just so easily disproven that when Satan inspired Paul, demon-possessed Paul, he was slipping. And by the time he got to Muhammad, it was just an abortion. Islam is the worst religion ever conceived. Allah spends all of his time in hell. It's obvious, and by the time you get to Islam, that Allah is Satan, and that Muhammad was the worst of men. So he has certainly slipped. The Quran's the worst book ever written. But at this moment, he was certainly shrewder than any other creature. Now, it's also important to recognize that as God, he had deployed. This means that Hasatan, the serpent, was working for Yahowah. Yahowah created him. Yahowah deployed him. They are not, Hasatan's not God's adversary. He is an adversary of humankind, but God was insistent that choice be legitimate, that you have a realistic, what appears realistic, choice to not be associated with him. Hasatan fills that role, and in this case, he was the one who was dispatched to accomplish what follows. So as we read this, Nakash, spellbinding serpent representing Hasatan, the adversary, was clearly symbolic. Dode serves as the Passover lamb. He was never a lamb, but the lamb is symbolic. My role in the last days is as a bull. I'm clearly not or hooved and don't have horns that I know of anyway. And so it's symbolic. It speaks of the character, the nature of a bull when characterizing a particular man. Eliah, who will return as one of the final two witnesses, is presented as a goat. And clever and bold and all of those kinds of things as well. A goat with gab, if you will. So God uses metaphors. He called the Israelites on the Exodus children. They were not, but the term just depicts the kind of role that Yahweh was trying to establish with them as father and sons. So you need to know the serpent is merely symbolic. Hasatan is an amoral and sometimes immoral spiritual being. His outward appearance on this occasion would have been brilliant, radiant, luminous. He's comprised of energy and light. And he would have been known to Adam and to Chawah because, well, he was a Kerub, something that we learn in the book of Ezekiel, where Satan had been one of those positioned on the wall guarding Eden. So I'm pleased to see here, as I've mentioned to you, that Yahweh limited the period of time in which Hasatan would be and remain particularly clever, using the perfect conjugation, because at this point, in the books that I have written to expose him in Christianity, for example, and also in Islam, there are 5 volumes of the Goddamn Religion series, 5 of the Twistianity series. I found it exceedingly easy to outthink Satan and to expose and condemn the religions. So he is not the smartest life form around now. He can be outmaneuvered and we can outthink him. And that's important. That was really one of the challenges that God wanted us to overcome. If, he creates a being that can mislead and we are easily misled, then that's not good in terms of God being able to trust us. Again, we have to have challenges. We have to meet those challenges. We have to overcome them. Hasatan provides that. And now I think it's exceedingly easy to outthink him. But to do that, of course, you have to think. And that is something that the religious don't do. Jesus Christ is modeled after Hasatan. So is Allah. So is Hashem. These are gods men have made. And the advocates for those religions were all demon possessed, mostly by their own admission. Paul admitted that he was satanically possessed, and so did Muhammad. So you just need to know that's his status at this point. And that I should also tell you that Satan has a type. And when we read through the prophets, particularly what Gabry'el, Dode, said through Daniel, and what's in the 14th chapter of Yeshaya, Isaiah, as well as other places throughout the text, there is no question as to who the person that Christians view as the Antichrist, this would be the corporeal incarnation of Satan, is today. He's Donald Trump. So if you look at the perversity of Muhammad and Paul, and now Donald Trump, I can tell you emphatically that Satan has a type. Also telling and typically missed is it is evident that Yahweh deployed Satan at this time. He used him. The meaning of Asha, engaged and acted, is clear in this regard. Therefore, Satan was programmed to do exactly as he has done, which has been to sometimes misquote and sometimes to accurately quote God's instructions to elicit an adversarial response. Yahweh did far more than allow this to occur because the verb indicates that he facilitated the response. And he may have even scripted it. And I think that as we get later to it, Satan's statements are actually prophetic. So it's clear that Yahweh scripted it. So this is how God has specifically caused the fall of man. Therefore, once again, we find affirmation that God had grown weary with the relationship between himself and Adam in Eden. And this means that after he gave up on Adam, given the choice to be with Chawah, man chose to be with his counterpart rather than with God. Therefore, the disappointment was mutual. Now, God would never have said it isn't good for man to be alone if he wasn't planning on leaving Adam. And so at that point, there was no Chawah. So he created Chawah just so that man would not be alone because God was already pulling away from the relationship. Now, this being the case, the breach in this relationship would ultimately provide a fresh canvas to paint God's portrait. Ultimately, he wanted to portray what we were, where we failed here and where we can succeed 8 years from now. Now, given time, his Bereth covenant, his Torah teaching, his Miqra'ey, invitations to be called out and meet, coupled with some men and women more to his liking that God would choose and inspire, they would lead many back into a position where only two had been previously. This would afford the opportunity to be better educated, more experienced, and far more reliable and entertaining. Now, even with more evidence before us, we can now be assured, especially at this point, that Yahweh wanted man to grow up. And the only way for that to occur was him to move out. I think there's a movie called Failure to Launch that was hilarious about how an adult man needs to leave home and be out on his own. It's why Yahweh said regarding Adam and Chawah right before this conversation that it's appropriate for a man to leave his father and mother and to be with his woman. We need to fly the coop, if you will, to get out of the nest for us to grow up and mature. So in this case, there was no substance to the man. And frankly, as we progress in the story, we find that Adam was a bit of a nitwit, a man without character or a backbone. When offered what he knew was wrong, he took it without a word of protest. So he certainly wasn't trustworthy. And given the opportunity to accept responsibility, he passed the buck. He blamed both the woman and God for his ineptitude. But that's getting ahead of the story. And fortunately now that the tree of knowledge has been restored and the series called Yahowah, you see these 35 books surrounding me. They're all free at yahowah.com, yahowah.com, that we have experienced a lot of good and bad and personal interactions over the past 6 millennia as humankind, and we're becoming more interesting. We're can be conversationalists. We can be enjoyable explorers. By first having become good listeners, we are gradually becoming good coworkers. So, per God's direction, Yahweh sent Satan, and he went after the woman, such that she would corrupt her man. Hasatan began with a very modest embellishment of God's testimony, establishing credibility by commingling much of what was true with a tiny little lie. It was the same formula he would use to advance religions like Christianity and Judaism. It's mother's milk of politics. It's how conspiratorial deceptions build and grow, with the lies simply growing bigger and bigger over time as more and more evidence is ignored. So this is how it reads. Then he said to the woman, so what if it were true that God said you should not make a habit of eating from any tree of Hagan, of the sheltered garden? Bereshith, Genesis 3:1. Now, while it may sound a bit audacious to suggest that it doesn't matter what God actually said, isn't that what's required for there to be a Talmud, a New Testament, and a Quran? They all go off on their own tangents, irrespective of God's guidance, don't they? And if that were not bad enough, the religious, like Satan, have felt at liberty to alter God's instructions to fit their agenda. There's no Jesus or Christ in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. David is the Messiah, the Son of God. There are no crosses. There's no churches. There's no Christians. There's no Christmas. There's no Easter. There's no Sunday worship. There's no prayer. None of this stuff exists. It's all added. So what if God said such and such? What does it matter? Who cares? Let's build our own religion. We'll make our own God. In fact, we can just turn a man into a God. Well, that'll be clever, right? Oh, then for fun, we'll have men kill God. Oh boy, won't that be great? Oh, then we'll have God be twinkle toes and come back to life. Yeah. That'll be a great religion. It's disgusting, actually. Men have felt at liberty to alter God's instructions, his teaching, to fit their agendas. So apart from this tactic, there really would be no religious texts. Now, it's worth noting here that in writing the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament, Paul never once quoted anything from the Torah and prophets accurately. Every single citation in all 14 of Paul's letters is screwed up. He butchers them all. And in the Quran, of course, nothing even approaches reality, as Talmud stories were twisted almost beyond comprehension. Now, in this particular case, God had provided the appropriate guidance. He said, if you recall, Yahweh Almighty, he provided direction concerning the man, saying, from every tree of the garden, you can continually and actually eat. There were no restrictions. You can eat from any tree you want to. You can eat as long as you want to from any tree of the garden. He would then follow that up and say, well, there is a consequence from one tree, that tree of knowledge. It is something that if you continually consume from it prematurely, well, then you're going to die. So that's quite different than, something different actually than what Hasatan said. So there's only one tree that God said that Adam should not habitually consume due to the consequence. It was premature for man to know such things, especially the kind of things that I have now refuted in the 3 volumes of Babel, the 5 of Twistianity, and the 5 of goddamn religion. Nevertheless, Satan did what he inspired Paul and Muhammad to do when creating the New Testament and Quran. He offered a modification of God's testimony such that it sounded plausible to the unthinking. You see, if you're going to fool people, you don't ever come out with a wholesale lie. It doesn't seem plausible. You can't pass a counterfeit bill if it's written, printed in pink and has an Easter bunny on it. You've got to make it look like the real thing. Just a few strokes that are not quite right. And yet, it's a fraud. Now, keep in mind, there were no restrictions placed on Adam. He could eat whatever he saw fit. There were no constraints, just beneficial results and, one negative consequence. And all of the options before him. And this was not an, if you make one mistake, I'm going to kill you scenario. No. Akal eating was spoken in the imperfect which denotes ongoing and habitual behavior. This was parental device, not a Lord's command. Well, nevertheless, Chawah, which means to speak one's mind, she took the bait. Yeah, Chawah does not mean life giver. Chaya would be life giver, but Chawah means to tell us what you really think. The woman said, she is now being Chawah, the woman said to this tempting and toxic creature, Hanakash, from the fruit of the tree of the garden we can eat, but from the tree of ha'etz, the tree which for the benefit of the relationships in the center of Hagan, the sheltered garden, God said you should not actually make a habit of eating from him. In addition, you should not make contact with it. You should not strike it, lest you will die. No, that's not what God said, actually. The woman went way off on a tangent here. And actually, the tree that was depicted in the center of the garden, that was the tree of lives. God didn't actually say exactly where the location was. It's inferred that it would be near the tree of lives, but the tree of knowledge wasn't co-located. And she didn't mention the name of the tree, which was the tree of knowledge. That's interesting by itself. And God did say you can eat from any tree of the garden. And there was not a but in it. And he did say that if you make a habit of actually eating from the tree of knowledge, that there will come a day when you will die. He said nothing about you should not make contact with it or that you should not strike him. Now, I have long suspected that there were many reasons that all of the fuss and focus has been on ha'etz dayath, the tree of knowledge, rather than the tree of lives, since they were in harmony with Yahweh's instructions prior to Chawah's decision to elevate her status in a manner consistent with, or inconsistent, I should say, with God's guidance. The tree of lives really was of no interest to them because they were already living without concern of dying. It wouldn't be until they were estranged from the garden that we would need access to the knowledge of right and wrong to locate the tree of lives and know how to capitalize upon its fruit to resolve the consequence of our impending deaths. Therefore, what has become essential was then only a tempting curiosity. In their present state, they would gain nothing but aggravation to be acquainted with all of the ways to irritate God and disassociate from him, the knowledge of that which is malignant and wrong and malicious and bad. But a time would come when it would be essential to recognize that which was separating us from Yahweh so that we could identify the problem, so that we could understand what was wrong with religion and avoid it, so that we could actually return to God. Now, also worth emphasizing, there was a direct and irrefutable correlation between Dode and the Tree of Lives as a result of Dode opening the door to life on Passover. Similarly, Yada's Yahowah series, it has become the Tree of Knowledge, just as foretold through the Choter, directing a lost world back to Father and Son, to the Bereth covenant and the Miqra'ey invitations to meet with God. This is yet another affirmation of the roles of the greater and lesser luminaries that were presented during the creation account in the opening chapter of the Torah in Bereshith chapter 1, both serving as signs of the Mow'ed, the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. And in this case, Satan and Chawah wanted to preempt the process by prematurely possessing the power of that knowledge. Now, as noted previously, there is no indication that Chawah had ever engaged in a conversation with God or received any instruction from him. And yet, she is shown misrepresenting what the man had told her regarding Yahweh's guidance. This is the first indication of why Yahweh infused his second statement on avoiding the promotion of false gods and goddesses with lo Chawah. Lo Chawah is in the midst of the second statement that God etched in stone, negating what Chawah was doing here. So Chawah was about to make her preference known, and her preferences were not good. And by the way, when etz becomes etzah in regard to the Choter, the knowledge that the Choter receives and conveys through his diath as etzah is on the complete picture that God is portraying. Oh, it wouldn't be until such time as we knew that our experience in the garden would lead us back into the garden and tell us how to clean up our act so that we were interesting to God in our return to the garden, that the etzah could grow beyond an etz in his delivery of this information. So etzah literally defines the totality of this picture, framing it, showing it all to you from the proper perspective, as we're doing now, as has never been done before. So they were premature by 6,000 years. Now, having observed Chawah, Satan knew that she wanted to be more than this man's helper. She wasn't lusting for the fruit of the tree of knowledge because she wanted to be a benefit to Adam. No, she had designs on being a goddess. So Hasatan said that she could do whatever she wanted without being subject to God's warning or the man's influence. She could be whatever she wanted to be. She could write herself into this story. So Nakash, the venomous serpent, he replied with ongoing implications to the woman. You all as mankind absolutely will not die. Lo muth muth. You representing humankind, the you here was written in the masculine plural, will not actually come to embody death. You all will not be killed. Call infinitive, where the negation of the graphic and genuine depiction of dying over time, and the call imperfect paragogic nung, second person masculine plural, depicts the ongoing implications of death. So Satan was clever here. Neither the man nor the woman would die on this day. No, he told the truth in that regard. Nor would all mankind die on any day. So what he said was actually true. And yet it was totally misleading, wasn't it? Clever. Out of understanding of the serpent's ploy is advanced, our understanding of it is advanced by the realization that by using the imperfect conjugation, this declaration would play out over time and was not therefore limited to any one day, much less this day. Hanakash was addressing the woman, and yet he phrased muth, death, such that it was addressing mankind because it was conveyed in the second person masculine plural, as in humankind. Therefore, in this, the second of three statements from the adversary, he deployed a strategy that he would use to make religions believable. He negated what God said by offering a credible alternative, effectively countering God's instructions by making such a tiny, minor, itsy-bitsy alteration. Like Paul. There was a Messiah in 33 CE. There was a Son of God in 33 CE. He fulfilled Passover by crucifixion. He was king of Israel. He would return again as king. He didn't actually die. His body did, but his soul went off to Sheol. It's just that Messiah was no David. A wee little change. Now, in like fashion, Paul, having been demon-possessed, made Jesus appear believable. Because there was a God who inspired his prophets to speak of his Son, his chosen one, and the Messiah, who would fulfill Passover by being crucified in 33 CE and then return as king. And while Satan and Paul knew that Yahowah was addressing Dode, the counterfeit was sufficiently clever to fool billions of unsuspecting souls. Now, as for believing that they will never die, this mantra proclaimed by Hasatan here is proclaimed also by the religious. Oh, we're not going to die. So-and-so is up in heaven smiling down on us. No, they're not. They're dead. They believe and overtly protest that they can do whatever they want and they're without consequence. Don't you dare tell us what's going to happen to us. Like I warned many of those who have gone off and gone astray, that their perversions of Yahweh's name and testimony, while many of these try to play off of my name, they will hashtag my name and then insult me, will result ultimately in their demise. And they scream, no one has the right to tell us that we're going to die. And yet, according to Yahowah, estrangement and death happens to be the most favorable option that is left to them. No matter how jaundiced the agenda, no matter how self-aggrandizing or embittered the motives, cultists and the religious, they believe their lies. I'm confident that Trump actually believes some of what he says. He's a confabulator. Now, knowing that she craved more, to write herself into the story, to be a star, to be a goddess, this is how Satan pushed Chawah's buttons. He would do the same for others. Because surely, by contrast, God, he is fully cognizant and totally familiar with Yada, knowing that instead, truthfully, during the day of a call of active consumption by you as mankind from it, and as a result of him, then your eyes and perceptions, especially the vision of men, they will be opened and perceive such that they will be able to comprehend and then decide. Then you will actually be at that time suitably similar and comparable to God, knowing and observing Yada, and therefore familiar with and comprehending good, that which is beneficial, productive, pleasing, and correct, and bad, that which is wrong, disappointing, and detrimental, hurtful, malicious, distressing, even troubling. Bereshith, Genesis 3:5. That was all it took. And she bet. In her mind, she would be like God. And even more, she could state her case by devouring Yada and claim that, that tree would give her the same abilities to know. Think it's any wonder that this series is called Yada, Yahowah? She would Chawah. She would determine and declare, openly revealing what she believed was beneficial and pleasing. And she would decide what was preposterous and distressing as well. And she would Chawah, promote her position for all to hear, or so she believed. Therefore, lo Chawah, with the name negated as a verb, means don't pretend that you speak for God or that you're at liberty to reinterpret his instructions. Lo Chawah as a verb, the basis of the name foretells that there were no mother gods to claim as their own, and that those who pretend to speak for them will be judged and condemned. Lo Chawah plainly states, do not pretend to Yada to know or to speak over Yada, and do not contravene or convolute what Yada represents either, not as the Choter, not as the tree of knowledge. And no matter how cunning you may think you are, and how captivating you may be, even confusing, these things are a far cry from Chawah, genuine intelligence and wisdom. and they have been supplied to the Choter by the Ruach of Yahowah. You can't compete with that. Don't try. Benefit from it. He's not selling you his fruit. He offered it freely. Lo Chawah is a warning not to preempt Yada or Yada Yahowah as the Etz Dayah, this tree of knowledge. They represent the last and best hope to recognize what Dode represents as the tree of lives and to capitalize on all that he achieved by fulfilling Pesach and Matzah. Now, as an interesting insight in Hebrew grammar, there are actually 4 conjugations. The perfect and imperfect we know quite well. They address time-constrained and ongoing action, while the participle and the infinitive, well, they convey the same attributes relative to time, but they also create a hybrid between a verb and a noun. Therefore, in this case, with the participle, yada becomes to know yada, with the verb conveying an actionable and descriptive title. The implications are significant because the adversary's strategy then and now is to babble, to commingle truth and lies, to confuse and to confound, beginning with statements which are mostly accurate. This is the most effective way to mislead, and explains why religions have become so popular, because this is their foundation. So in this case, Yada, in fact, does know Yada. He has been fully aware that there will come a time when many will become familiar with Yada as well, and they will devour the fruit he is offering. These 35 books that you see around me, all under the Yahowah series, and now hundreds upon hundreds of Yahowah logs. So in this case, not only was Yada, know, described as an actionable noun, so was a call to consume. These acknowledgments address our time, this very moment, when the Etz Dayah is revealing the identity of the Etz Chaim, with Yada acknowledging Dode, the lesser luminary reflecting the greater luminary's light, being the light of life. And that is also that all mankind does not actually die. So at long last, the eyes of man are being opened such that some people are finally becoming perceptive. For the first time in 6,000 years, many of us comprehend what we need to know to properly respond to Yahowah. We're aware of what God is offering, as well as expecting in return. Now, this is what is causing the select few to be more like God, particularly at this time, which is exactly what God wants. He wants us to become more like him. Good listeners, engaged, responsive, collaborators, contributors, thoughtful, learning, teaching, reliable. Even God made mistakes and learned from them. He regretted having conceived man. He certainly regretted speaking directly to the children of Israel during the Exodus, showing them the promised land when they rebelled against him. The whole Exodus experience, God is furious with his people. Yeah, so God made mistakes too. But I tell you what, just as we have the opportunity to learn from them, so does he, and he does. And it is by learning from our mistakes that we not only develop resolve and character and prove that we are reliable and dependable, but it's those mistakes which make us interesting. If everything in God's story just played out all, lollipops and tulips, God, what would the purpose be? If every person was perfect, God would be bored out of his mind. The last thing he wants is a lot of mini-me's. He wants us to be like him in the sense of having the similar attributes, loving the same things, passions for similar goals, listening, exploring, learning, observing, working together, getting up when we stumble, proving our worth. And so this is really something that is heretofore not been understood. So this is what is causing a few select individuals to be as God intended. It is yada knowledge which makes this possible. A familiarization, a yada, is just now being yada recognized. It is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Packed within the volumes of Yahowah is a nourishing harvest of information and insights about Yahweh, his Torah, and his prophets. And we are now aware that his Torah guidance leads us to the Bereth covenant through the Mow'ed, restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. In this way, the Katan Ma'or reflects the brilliance of the Gadol Me'or as an oath, a sign for the Mow'ed, these 7 annual meetings with Yahweh, with the Etz Dayath, familiarizing the world about the brilliance of the Etz Chaim Dod, our Savior. And while that is obviously told, really good news, productive and beneficial, now with the publication of the Babel, Twistianity, and Goddamn Religion volumes, for the first time in a long time, humanity has the wherewithal to know what is deceitful, destructive, deadly, demonic, and diabolical. The religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have been objectively exposed and condemned, excoriated logically, using evidence and reason. The path home has been cleared of those obstacles that have tripped so many for so long, that have obscured the path. Now, these 13 volumes within the Yahowah library are an expose on Ra, that which is caustic to mankind, wrong, disappointing, and detrimental, malicious, and troubling. Nothing comparable to those 13 volumes has ever been written. And they're freely available right now when they're needed most. Now, as we evaluate this discussion, it is apparent that Yahweh scripted it, which is his prerogative, of course, since Malach are spiritual messengers, and he created and programmed Hasatan for this purpose. And now it is obvious that God wanted Adam and Chawah out of the garden. Scripting the narration like this was not only the best way to achieve that result, by doing so, Yahweh could infuse the narrative with prophecy, which is precisely what he has done, making it brilliant. And right at the perfect time for us to capitalize upon it. Now, to achieve this telescoping of time, if you will, from 6,000 years ago to today, Yada was spoken in the participle, such that Yada would appear at a point in time in the distant future, while a call, consume, was stated in the infinitive because the fruit he would be providing would be nourishing to those who devour it for a very long time, prior to, during, and even after mankind's return to the garden. The presentation departs from a simple historic discussion between the serpent and Chawah with atem. You, because it was written, certainly spoken, now written, in the masculine plural, rather than the feminine singular. Hebrew has a feminine singular. It could have been written and spoken in the feminine singular. It was not. It was written, spoken in the masculine plural. It is therefore depicting a much larger audience, including all of those who will be consuming the fruit of the tree of knowledge in the future. Men who can then be seen as from it, as a result of him, reminding us that the tree is symbolic of a person, the Choter. Likewise, the eyes being opened via a pakach are also depicted in the masculine plural. Therefore, rather than Chawah's perceptions being enhanced as a result of the perfect conjugation, we discover that it's mankind who will one day come to understand. And since Pakak was shaded by the Nifl stem, those who come to comprehend through their own initiative will be able to determine their fate by processing the information and the insights that they have gleaned from this tree of knowledge. The Nifl has them carrying out and receiving the intent of the verb. Do you ever think grammar could be this fun? Now, the clever use of Hebrew grammar throughout reveals that a time will come when you, again conveying mankind in the masculine plural, Haya, will actually be Ka, suitably similar to God. For these select individuals who earn Yahweh's favor and trust. This is the purpose of the Etz Chaim and Etz Dayath, because as a result of the Moedim, which they fulfill, first Dod, Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, we will become immortal, perfected, enriched, empowered children of God. The Mow'ed of shabuw'ah, fulfilled by the tree of knowledge, brings the covenant family home, while taruw'ah is restorative, purging the final remnant of guilt, so they can celebrate Dod's arrival with Yahweh on Kippurim, and then enter Gan Eden on Sukkah. And through it all, it is what Yada knows that actually makes it possible for mankind to benefit from the fulfillment of the Moedim. Now, reaffirming this conclusion, the second iteration of Yada, to know, was also scribed in the participle form, making Yada an actionable noun at this time. Also interesting, Yada conveyed in the construct form is bound to all things tob, good, because that's what follows it: beneficial, pleasing, correct, and productive. And while that is a marvelous assessment, we are also aware that Yada will serve as the means to repudiate all that is raw, wrong, disappointing, detrimental, and malicious. And may I remind you, no one has ever written 5 volumes that prove emphatically, undeniably, irrefutably that Christianity is a fraud by comparing what Paul and the authors of the Christian New Testament wrote compared to what God said. No one has ever done that before, and I destroy the myth of Christianity and that of Jesus Christ. No one has ever done that before. No one has ever tackled Islam as I did, to organize the Quran chronologically out of the current jumbled mess and to put it into the context of Muhammad's life by using the historical hadith, that of Ishaq and Tabari, so that the Quran could be understood for the first time because it was set into the context of Muhammad's life, with 5 translations of the Quran covering the entire Quran from beginning to end. 5 volumes, 4,250 pages of irrefutable proof that Allah was not a God, Muhammad was not a prophet, and that Islam is not trustworthy. No one had ever done that before. No one has ever proven that the book of Ezekiel was inspired by Hasatan, which is why the scenes in heaven are of Babylonian gods, which is why Ezekiel was so tormented, which is why the book presents 25 ways to hideously murder Jews, which is why there are 2 ruthless rape scenes in Ezekiel attacking Jewish women. It's why there's the Copper Khan and this grandiose plan to tear down everything that is in Jerusalem and build this monstrosity with Trumpian naming rights. It's why the 7 Moedim are all changed to serve Hasatan. No one dared say, much less prove, that Ezekiel was a fraud. But that even though it is a fraud, that it was inspired by Satan, we can learn an enormous amount from it, because Satan has never been as fully exposed as he is in the book of Ezekiel. And then, of course, you can clarify many of the things that were nonsensical in the story. For example, there is no war of Armageddon. There is no Gog from Magog. There's no Magog war. There's no Valley of the Dry Bones. It's all a lie. And now prophecy makes sense. It's one cohesive story. But it also refutes the book of Revelation, because while Revelation is mostly a paraphrase of prior prophets, it quotes Ezekiel, that was a false prophet, 37 times, indicting itself as untrue. No one's ever done any of this before. So it's not only the story of good with, in this case, 35 volumes, 25 of which translate Yahweh's testimony from the oldest extant witnesses, the Dead Sea Scrolls, scrub it of the diacritical markings of the Masoretes, so that you could know exactly what God said in an amplified form with tens of thousands of unheralded insights. Oh, we have good beyond what anyone has ever perceived previously. And we have the bad. It is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right for our time. So by conveying this message this way, accurately, prophetically, with precision, Yahweh has given us a glimpse into his intellectual prowess. He actually told Chawah the truth, knowing that she wouldn't understand it and that she would respond inappropriately. And by doing so, God helps us understand what the future holds in store for us, how we're going to get from here to there, what is going to carry us through. And all it would take to figure this out was the allocation of the very Ruach spirit of Yahowah, in addition to the Ruach providing Chokmah, intelligence, Binah, understanding, Aqsa, complete comprehension and counsel, as that tree, of Gabor, of character and conviction, and of Yara, respect and admiration, of course, in addition to Diath, the very tree of knowledge. But even then, it would take this man 24 years of diligent study before he would pass this test and perceive the clues that we're discussing right now. Beyond speaking to us and laying out the future in the past, writing future history, if you will, Yahweh also had Satan press Chawah's buttons, playing into her delusions of grandeur. God presented all of this for us on this occasion, knowing that when prompted, we'd find it and we'd learn from it. And so we have, and so are you. And for our comprehension to progress at this accelerated pace, it was time to support Yada with better, more mature, devoted, and rational individuals as we move from editing a library of books to coalescing comprehension and communication in real time with this, the Yahowah blog. The message is now being delivered in the manner most suitable for this moment, in the immediate proximity of the fulfillment of the final Mow'ed Miqra'ey, shabuw'ah, taruw'ah, Kapurim, and Sukkah. So unable to process what she had been told, Chawah gave a curious glance towards the tree of knowledge, just peeking at something she coveted. And with no actual enticement, she jumped at the chance to take what did not belong to her. Then the woman looked, and she saw that indeed the tree was beautiful and pleasing as a source of food to consume, and that indeed it was visually appealing and desirable, even eliciting cravings. So she coveted al-aqsa, the tree, to impart insights and inspire success and to convey understanding. Oh, she would be wise, huh? Therefore, she grasped hold and she seized from the fruit, and she ate. And she also gave it to her man. Ish, not Adam this time. He was in a relationship with her. And then he ate, he imbibed and consumed on an ongoing basis. Call imperfect. Bereshith 3:6. It was as if learned nothing. He showed absolutely no appreciation for what Yahowah had shared with him. He had more to eat than could be imagined. And yet, without hesitation or a second thought, he took the one thing God had advised him against. As a companion, as a friend, even as a son, he was useless. He had the intelligence of a fish swimming in the bowl and the depth of character to match. And quite frankly, Chawah didn't actually entice him. She simply handed him something off the tree of knowledge, and he devoured it as if he had never known God. He demonstrated emphatically that he could not be trusted. By ascribing the imperfect conjugation to ra'ah, she perceived, we know that the woman craving, her craving actually commenced in advance of this meeting. It had been ongoing. And clearly, she coveted the ha'etz dayah, this tree of knowledge. It reads, so their eyes were able to see. Then they, and it reads here, as men, they recognized, as a result, their nakedness and their exposure as they became clever and shrewd. Yoma, their craftiness and cleverness had bared all, such that they were subtle and elusive, without, however, adequate protection. The protection of the garden was no longer theirs. Then they lay hold of an ascending shoot or a twig, an elah, a rising stem, an uplifted sucker, singular. It's from Allah, to rise. A fig, for a more opportune occasion of, well, it's ina, of copulation, and from anah, to meet. Then they were prepared, acting, engaging, and doing for themselves, well, a chagarah, a belt, a sash. It's from chag. They were celebrating. They were having a party. Yeah, when you get really to the root of these words, they don't actually say what we've been led to believe. They had obviously exposed themselves. Isn't that the truth? And they had shown that they were millennia away from acquiring the knowledge needed to return to God. Clearly, they were nowhere near what Yahowah would eventually become. I've devoted 24 years to this already, 100,000 hours. 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week for a score and 4 years. That is what it's taken to develop the knowledge that I presently possess and that I'm sharing with you. They were nowhere near that with a few bites. Plus, Yahowah, who is spoken of here in this text, he's the Choter. He's the stem off the tree of knowledge. But the best that these two could do by comparison was some grass, some sticks. And even that may be too favorable an interpretation as we actually analyze these words. Now, while I recognize that tafar is typically rendered, they sewed it together. They had neither thread nor needles, so that didn't happen. They had shown no previous ingenuity, and neither stems nor twigs can be stitched. Used only this once in an inspired text. It also appears in Job and Ecclesiastes as well as Ezekiel, but neither of those were inspired by God. Tafar is related to tapash, which is quite common, and it means to take hold of and to handle. To take hold of and to handle. So what were they grasping and handling, you might ask. Well, as for Allah, since it is scribed identically to Allah, to rise, it is likely addressing an ascending shoot, an elevated sucker, or a rising stem. That would make this either a joke or an indication that they were more carnal than they were cerebral at this moment. You can choose. And the possibility certainly exists because ta'ina also conveys sexual drive and copulation, giving new meaning to the sucker that was rising at this time. It is from ana, which is to greet, to meet, and to capitalize on an opportune moment. So once again, you can make of this whatever you will. I'm just the messenger. I'm delivering what the words say. I'm suggesting that God had a sense of humor at this moment. And I rather like his style. But if we were able to be literal with this phrasing, it actually reads, then they lay hold of the rising sucker and copulated at the opportunity, celebrating. Moreover, there is no indication that the conclusion helps because Chagorath as a small belt / or girdle is from Chog, which means they were having a party. So there you are. Now, I'm going to read this next statement, and we're going to conclude this program at this point. We're an hour and 15 minutes into our showtime, a little longer than would be perfect at this point. But it's going to be a big springboard into what happens, because now we're going to go into the penalty phase. It reads, then with ongoing implications over time, they actually heard that which pertains to the cold voice of Yahowah Almighty, as he independently and now on his own initiative, unaffected by any other influences, was traveling about, pursuant to Hagan, the enclosed and sheltered garden, concerning the ruach, spirit of the day. Therefore the man, Adam, and his woman withdrew as he moved away by himself, no longer assisted, influenced, or helped by anyone from the presence of Yahowah, Almighty God, in the midst of Hagan, the sheltered gardens Atz tree. Barashith 3:8. I'll just summarize some of these indications as a teaser for you. It began by saying that based upon what had transpired, there would be ongoing implications over time. 6,000 years of implications, plus the 1,000 years now in our return to the garden, plus the 8th octave as we go off and explore the universe. And it says they actually heard. Shema means to hear, to listen, to that which pertains to the the voice of Yahowah. It's not the sound of Yahowah. It's not the noise of Yahowah. Yahowah doesn't have little feet that he was walking in the garden. All of God will not fit on our planet, much less in a garden, much less in a human body. God was providing his voice on this occasion. They heard what pertains to the voice, the cold voice of Yahowah Almighty. And at this point, Yahweh was independent of them. So he was on his own initiative. He was unaffected by any other influences as he was traveling about. Relationship was over. And of course, it was also over pursuant to the microcosm of Hagan, the enclosed and sheltered garden. It would be no more. It would literally disappear. And it would stay gone until that microcosm is fleshed out and the entire earth is terraformed back into the sheltered garden condition. And all of this was concerning the ruach, spirit of the day. Why? Well, because there would be a cold voice of God infused with the ruach spirit of this day. Therefore, the man, Adam, and his woman withdrew. And it was he, the man, who moved away, doing this by himself. He even stepped away from Chawah. He moved away by himself. He was no longer assisted, no longer influenced, no longer helped by anyone, which means that Chawah wasn't fulfilling her design parameters, which were to help him. He retreated by himself. It's the Hitpael, imperfect, third person, masculine, singular, from the presence of Yahowah, Almighty God. In the midst of Hagan, the sheltered gardens, Et's tree. He was sitting in the damn tree. He was just chomping away. This idea that he had a bite of an apple is nonsense. He was in the midst of the tree trying to gobble down whatever he could before, well, the consequence bit him. And so you have some insights here that are very different than what you may have previously perceived. And, well, that's a lot to unpack. I can't wait to share with you what God has to say about each of these individuals and what they would endure, because it is prophetic of precisely what God wants you to know right now today. Although I'm going to tell you right then tomorrow. Thank you for listening.